we have some Ayurveda. Oh, can you see that? Is it right? Yeah. Ayurveda. Am I pronouncing it right? But good day and gratitude, family. This is Face the Nation with Bolden Unchained, and we are back again. It's been a few days, at least two, and I do apologize. However, I came back sooner than I thought I was going to be able to. And yeah, I would like to say congratulations to you all. We did finish our first book. So even if you joined for a few seconds or whatever, that is just fine. That is marvelous because we have to start somewhere. And reading Red Summer, it was a challenge, but we did it. We succeeded. We read Red Summer, the summer of 1919, and the awakening of Black America. And I would like to stress again that on Bolden Unchained, our first and final concern is Black America. If that's not your concern, then you probably don't even want to come over here. We're not hurting anything in the middle, but our first and final concern is Black America. So yeah, and tonight we're on our second chapter of racial violence in Kentucky, 1865 to 1940. We're going to cover some of the hurt. We're going to cover the hurt, where the breakage began. And I have some of these books in my library. If you have some of these books in your library, join me every night, midnight with the ancestors, if you want to. If you got any other time, we can get on with your time and your book. We can just do this together, but I'm doing it. And first of all, I would like to pour libations to the ancestors. I would like to pour libations to the ancestors, and I want to make that a part of our opening for our readings, because we do need to remember our ancestors. We need to recall them. We need to know them, have a relationship with them. The same way you got your relationship with Jesus and God and, the 12 prophets, the disciples, the 12 disciples and stuff, have that same energy for your ancestors. They deserve it. And if you can't do that, then yeah, you definitely need to go find somebody else to listen to. I mean, that's it and that's all. That's over here. I ain't got nothing else for you. Nobody. Yes, all this right here, honey, is for Black America. But we finna give libations. Yes, we're going to pour libations. And it's just some water in one of my little favorite cups right here. I set this, my glasses, I set this on the altar and give them water and stuff. So, and I wrote it down right here. Pouring libations is giving homage to the ancestors. And with this one here, to our ancestors, the hidden ones who manifested our freedom. To those ancestors, we pour libations. Ashe. I mean, you just pour a little water in there. Malcolm X, Ashe. Huey P. Newton, Ashe. Bobby Seale, Ashe. Mary Turner, Ashe. Emmett Till, Ashe. Goddess Hathor, Ashe. Isis, Ashe. Marcus Garvey, Ashe. We just, yeah. Ashe, I claim it. Spirit come through. It's just something that I've started doing. I was listening to Bobby Hemmett, and he does libations every video. And so I've started myself, trying to be better. Yeah, I don't want to be happier. I want to be better. Okay, chapter 2. Racial violence in Kentucky, 1865 to 1940. Lynchings, mob rule, and legal lynchings by George C. Wright. I don't think we're going to watch a video because I was watching something else. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and read chapter 2. I would say chapter 3, but you know how that goes. Chapter 2, lynchings are necessary. 1875 to 1899. Hallie Ermini Rives, Hallie Ermini Rives, published a novel, Smoking Flax, Flax, to justify the lynchings that were occurring during the 1890s. Dedicated to My Mother in the South, the novel is set in Georgetown, Kentucky, and centers on Elliot Harding, a young white man from New England with radical ideas who moves to Kentucky, the South, to take control of the family property. From the start, Harding is unsparing in his criticism of local whites for condoning the lynching of Afro-Americans. Think of it. More than 1,000 human lives forfeited to Judge Lynch for the South's record for the past 10 years. What a horrible record. It seems almost incredible that such lawlessness can exist in communities supposed to be civilized. Would to God it were but an evil dream, and that I could today assure the world that this terrible condition is but the unfounded imagining of a nightmare mind. At some point, Harding meets and falls in love with a beautiful young woman. Shortly before their wedding, however, she is brutally raped and murdered by Ephraim Cooley, Ephraim an educated Negro. The local sheriff, intent on justice being done, takes steps to prevent a lynching. Despite the horrible crime and the desire of whites to have the violent episode ended, the trial is delayed to locate several witnesses for Cooley. The trial is not quick. It takes all day to see the jury. At last, Cooley is found guilty and sentenced to death. The entire ordeal, from the death of his future bride through the long trial, leads Harding to reassess his views on lynching. Holmes, I have been thinking of my old views. God knows I have had time to think and cause to think. I am appreciating now the problem you of the South could not solve. Then 2 shocking surprises occur. Cooley's execution is delayed, and the governor commutes the death sentence to a term of life in prison. The novel comes to a climax as the sheriff and his men hurry to get Cooley safely on the train to be transported to state prison. There was a sudden rush and speeding through the darkness. An unkempt figure, running staggeringly as though in exhaustion, leaped to the platform and pursued the moving train. A sudden flash, a sharp report, and Ephraim Cooley fell back dead, shot through the heart. By the time the train had drawn back to the station, the platform was deserted. Only the shrouding mist of blue smoke remained. The identity of Cooley's killer is unknown. Obviously, however, it is Harding. The former radical from New England now clearly understands and sympathizes with the view that lynching blacks is sometimes a necessity in the South. Several years after the publication of Smoking Flax, Rives wrote a letter denouncing the death sentence given a white woman in Vermont. How could Vermont consider itself an enlightened New England commonwealth if it allowed this poor woman to be executed, she asked. Regardless of the crime, women must be given mercy and the chance to repent. No governor can evade that question when in his hands lies the issue of life and death. It can give him small comfort to decide to let the law take its course, because the course of that law is through his final executive hands. His own pen must sign the sheriff's death warrant. If I do not stretch my hand to save the drowning man, I drown him. After denouncing the legal hanging of a woman, Rives reaffirms the necessity of lynching blacks. In the South, men are hanged with the formality of a trial and without the formality of a trial when Judge Lynch holds court. When the latter is the case, it is a deed performed under strong pressure of racial feelings, inspired generally by atrocities of which the North as a section can have no conception, and by the necessity of furnishing example to a race which is still, as a race, brutalized and subject. Rives concludes that the horrible crimes committed by blacks justified their deaths at the hands of the mob. Lynch law is swift and sure, directed always to example. It is the lurid object lesson necessary to impress the ignorance and passion which give it cause. It is thus a measure of self-defense and prevention, which can be the only logical reason for the existence of capital punishment anywhere. Whether Rives' book and letter were widely read and had any impact on public attitudes about lynchings is unclear. Even without Rives' defense of lynchings, most Southern whites found ample justifications for taking the law into their own hands. Like her, most of them believed that the primary cause of lynchings was the rape of white females by black brutes. The law, they argued, was ineffectual and time-consuming, and most often it hindered justice. As the chapters on legal lynchings will show, Kentucky's governors, regardless of party affiliation, would not have commuted the death sentence of a black man found guilty of both rape and murder. Indeed, the governors applauded their fellow citizens for allowing the law to take its course and permitting a black to be legally hanged. Nevertheless, Rives uses the state's unwillingness to fully punish the black rapist, murderer, as the cause of the lynching. Her novel, in short, agreeing with the view held by most whites of that day, depicted lynchers as sincere people forced to take the law into their own hands to ensure that their civilization was not destroyed by blacks. As the sheriff said to Harding when trying to console him for the loss of his beloved bride-to-be, it is useless to attempt to convey in words what the South has long endured, but I believe she is on the point of struggling from beneath the crushing burden that weighs her down. A time will come when our Southern governors will order a special term of superior court to try speedily a criminal and invariably fix the death penalty for the offense which is largely responsible for lynching. How much graver, deeper, more human now must seem to you our tragedies and our defense. We would indeed welcome a worthier mode or the day when there will be no such tragedies. Like the novelist Hallie Rives, many observers in Kentucky, especially newspaper editors and local historians, stated that lynchings were necessary to punish murderers and rapists who might otherwise go unpunished, and to show others what awaited them for engaging in outrageous criminal activities. Many editors claimed to be opposed to lynching and would consistently denounce all acts of mob violence and lynchings that occurred outside their immediate areas. This right here seemed like when they started flipping the script, making you them and them you. This is where the peaceful spine come in, and it seemed like, whoo, wow, yeah. Now who's the the savage, the black man. Yeah, and this was in 1865. Soon as you stepped off the plantation. Yep. Yeah. Soon as you stepped off the plantation. Soon we stepped off that plantation. We didn't have no chance to be looked at and with mercy and sincerity and somebody be happy for us. Be happy for black people. Whenever a lynching happened close to home, however, the editors first expressed their disapproval of the violent act, but then explained that given the awful nature of the crime committed and the excitement it generated, a quick lynching had been the best way to bring the unrest to a close. In December 1892, a black youth, Bob Harper, was arrested in Bowling Green on a charge of rape. That's my granddaddy's last name, Harper, Harper. In December 1892, a black youth, Bob Harper, was arrested in Bowling Green on a charge of rape. Many whites expressed doubts about his guilt, but a white mob lynched him nevertheless. Writing about the lynching, a reporter expressed his approval of the killing of Harper. There can be no question as to Harper's guilt, and though his punishment was not brought about according to the forms of the law, all will admit that it was a righteous one. 4 years later, a black man was lynched in Mayfield for the rape of a white woman. Once again, a local reporter explained why the lynching was justified. While the Monitor deplores the necessity of mob violence, it realizes the fact that owing to the delays and the uncertainties of the courts, this is the only way to deal with men who are guilty of the crime, which is recognized in all sections of the civilized world as a sufficient cause for summary punishment. After all the raping and skinning and burning and lynching white people had done, and then all of a sudden, oh, we can't have that. Anti-life. Yep, anti-life. Local accounts of lynchings explained how the members of the mob, usually described as some of the best people in the community, were serious and orderly during the lynching, as if to have been drunk and rowdy would have somehow made the act more of a criminal offense. Resorting to Judge Lynch, white newspapers noted regularly would be unnecessary in their communities if Afro-Americans lived upright lives. Resorting to Judge Lynch, white newspapers noted regularly would be unnecessary in their communities if Afro-Americans lived upright lives. Whew. 3 black men were hanged in Lexington, Kentucky in January 1878. All were suspected of knowing the person responsible for the recent murder of a white man. The local newspaper, the Kentucky Gazette, published an editorial exonerating whites for the lynchings. Every illegal act is wrong and should be reprobated. reprobated. But so is midnight murder. And if midnight murder cannot be punished and repressed by legal process, are men to sit quietly down and see their neighbors murdered in cold blood? Contradicting the Kentucky Gazette, the New York Times concluded that the men were innocent of any wrongdoings. This led to an angry response from the Kentucky Gazette. They said blacks were responsible for at least 25 incendiary fires and the loss of countless horses and livestock. Lynchings was necessary, the paper noted, because since the end of slavery, The Negroes have been turned over to the officers of the law, and these are not numerous enough to control them as their masters did. The result is they harry over the county and render the lives of our farmers and their families one of perpetual anxiety and apprehension. If caught and convicted of stealing or any crime less than murder, the only punishment is the pen for a year or two. And then they come back, burning with revenge, to repeat their former offense in an aggravated form. Henry Watterson, Watterson, editor of the Louisville Courier-Journal for almost 50 years, took various stands on lynching. In a June 1894 editorial, he chastised Ida Wells Barnett, Ida B. Wells, and the British press for criticizing the South over the continuation of lynchings. The Negro woman from Memphis is still stirring up the British over the barbarism of the Southern people in lynching Negroes. The British ought to have no indignation for export. They need it all for home consumption. A people which have robbed and murdered more blacks than any other nation on the globe should have nothing to say because the Southern whites protect their women by killing their raptures. Several years later, however, he wrote editorials calling for the punishment of those responsible for several lynchings in Mayfield and in Graves County. Good men had to take control of the situation, he declared, because an open defiance of the law existed. Surely the identities of the lynchers were known to hundreds of witnesses, and if these are brought before the grand jury, they can be made to testify and the outlaws can be brought to justice, restoring the good name of Mayfield as a community determined to protect the legal rights of even its meanest citizens. If public sentiment approves the substitution of Judge Lynch for Judge Robbins, Robbins, nothing will be done, and very soon we may be regaled, Regaled, we may be regaled with another story of a victim hung or tortured. Three weeks later, after the grand jury had indicted 8 men, Watterson lauded the actions of the good citizens of Graves County who mean to wipe out the stain cast upon the community by a lawless element in its population. Then, in a real swift from his editorial in 1894, in a real shift from his editorial in 1894, Watterson expressed sympathy for Afro-Americans, the primary victims of lynchers. What is worse, this has been done in the case of poor and friendless Negroes. It does not appear that well-to-do criminals have suffered at the hand of regulators. The lynchings have been shocking acts not only of lawlessness, but of liability and injustice to the class whose rights, above all, should be shielded by the community, since they cannot protect themselves. It is difficult to determine which was the real Watterson, the one endorsing or the one protesting the acts of lynchers. Same thing. What they call that, double tongue? For the love of black people. Unlike Watterson, local historians have been consistent in justifying the lynchings of blacks in their communities. One of the most atrocious murders that ever disgraced Union County was the killing of Mr. Christopher Columbus Smith by a Negro named Jack Williams, wrote the local historian. After stabbing Smith to death, Williams fled, only to be captured and placed in jail. A week later, a mob took him from the jail and hanged him from the same tree that was used to hang at least 4 other people in Union County. It would have been better for the county if Williams had been brought to justice and executed according to the law, but the legal processes are so slow and sometimes so uncertain that the mob thought it best to prevent any chances of failure in his execution. Rufus Browder, Browder, a black sharecropper, shot and killed a white farmer in self-defense. 4 friends, 4 blacks, all friends of Browder were arrested for allegedly approving of Browder's actions. Rufus Browder, a black sharecropper, shot and killed a white farmer in self-defense. 4 blacks, all friends of Browder, were arrested for allegedly approving of Browder's actions. They were taken from jail and lynched. Relying completely on the perceived white version of the lynchings, the historian of Logan County wrote more than 50 years after the incident that the Negroes were thought to be organizing against the whites. It was thought that they were making certain people for death. They were marking certain people for death and naming certain of their color for the task. It was a time of hysteria and wild rumors. No contemporary accounts of the lynchings speak of Afro-Americans marking whites for death. The story of a black uprising was a rationale developed to help explain the killing of 4 innocent men. Even if lynching was too severe a punishment for the crime committed, local historians have depicted the black as being so totally worthless that the loss of his life was of no great concern. The people might be innocent of rape or murder, but surely he had been involved in petty crimes and was thus a burden to the community. A typical comment comes from the book on Bath County. By John A. Richards. In describing the lynching of Sam Bascom, Bascom, who had been accused of arson, Richards explains that the mob failed to give Bascom a chance to prove his innocence. Nevertheless, Bascom, a well-known but indolent colored citizen who loafed in and around town. Bascom was a well-known but indolent, Indolent, but indolent colored citizen who loafed in and around town. Andrew Holt, Holt, Alfred Holt, Holt, was lynched in Owensboro on Christmas Day, 1896, for the murder of a police officer. Writing more than 40 years later, William F. Hayes expressed no regret over the lynching. As I remember him after all these years, Alf Hope was a typical darky in appearance, chocolate color and thick-lipped, in character like many of his race, but a larger portion than now. He was ignorant, shiftless, and given to drink. But he had not been considered dangerous. In his book, Southern Outrages, A Statistical Record of Lawless Doings, Robert C.O. Benjamin, a black lawyer and newspaper editor who settled in Lexington in 1897, details some of the lynchings that occurred in the 1890s and challenged white folks over the causes for these violent acts. Writing in a style that will be adopted by the NAACP when reporting on lynchings, Benjamin pointed out that rape was a smokescreen for the real issue, the determination of Southerners to keep blacks at the bottom of society. I know that's right. It is only since the Negro has become a citizen and a voter that this change has been made. It has come along with the pretended and baseless fear of Negro supremacy. It is an effort to divest the Negro of his friends by giving him a revolting and hateful reputation. Benjamin dedicated his book to the widows and orphans of the murdered black men of the South. Writing in the early 1900s, Mary Church Terrell, Terrell, an Afro-American woman who worked unceasingly throughout her long life to end racial injustices, agreed with Benjamin that rape was not the real cause for lynchings in the South. Much as they ass had raped and skinned and lynched and burned and beat and stomped, literally chained black men to the back of vehicles and drove them through the town, from one end of the town to the other end of the town. So while we know today the stigma, the lies, the portrayal that's given to black men, we know all black men is not like the weak, vulnerable black man. But that narrative is what society believes. And society wants us to believe about the black man, but it's not true. Yeah. All races got some miscreants in it. And I want to say for the black man, because that's who I'm here for. We losing our motherfucking mind. How long we gonna stay in this burning house? Y'all gonna stay in this burning house. Black man, black woman. How long we gonna stay in this burning house choking, playing possum, smoke everywhere? But we don't want to leave. We don't want to get up and walk outside. You want to stay on the plantation. You want to stay right there where you at. But how long? How much longer we got here anyway? For real. How much longer do we even got here? If you got 2 years, 20 years, another 40 years, do we want to leave something different? Let me get back to reading because I don't even want to be here all night. I will. Ooh. They were taken from jail and lynched. And another thing, why they done set up here and got all this data, recollections of the black man raped, murdered, killed, arsoned, something as the reason for lynching. All of those same acts and worse that they own had just perpetrated on someone. Wasn't nothing done about it. Nothing. So no, it wasn't, because a crime was committed. Man. Relying completely on the perceived white version of the lynchings, the historian of Logan County wrote more than 50 years after the incident that the Negroes were thought to be organizing against the whites. I had already read this, but we'll read it again. It was thought that they were marking certain people for death and naming certain of their color for the task. It was a time of hysteria and wild rumors. No contemporary accounts of the lynchings speak of Afro-Americans marking whites for death. The story of a black uprising was a rationale developed to help explain the killing of 4 innocent men. Even if lynching was too severe a punishment for the crime committed, local historians have depicted the black as being so totally worthless that the loss of his life was of no great concern. The people might be innocent of rape or murder, but surely he had been involved in petty crimes and was thus a burden to the community. So it was okay. Anything. A typical comment comes from the book on Bath County by John A. Richards. In describing the lynching of Sam Bascom, who had been accused of arson, Richards explains that the mob failed to give Bascom a chance to prove his innocence. Nevertheless, Bascom was a well-known but indolent colored citizen who loafed in and around town. Alfred Holt was lynched in Owensboro on Christmas Day, 1896, for the murder of a police officer. Writing more than 40 years later, William F. Hayes expressed no regret over the lynching. As I remember him after all these years, Alf Holt was a typical darky in appearance, chocolate-colored and thick-lipped, in character like many of his race, but a larger portion than now. He was ignorant, shiftless, and given to drink, but he had not been considered dangerous. In his book, Southern Outrages, a statistical record of lawless doings, Robert C.O. Benjamin, a black lawyer and newspaper editor who settled in Lexington in 1897, details some of the lynchings that occurred in the 1890s, and he challenged white people over the causes for these violent acts. Writing in a style that would be adopted by the NAACP when reporting on lynchings, Benjamin pointed out that rape was a smokescreen for the real issue: the determination of Southerners to keep blacks at the bottom of society. And that's what it is today. It is only since the Negro has become a citizen and a voter that this charge has been made. It has come along with the pretended and baseless fear of Negro supremacy. It is an effort to divest the Negro of his friends by giving him a revolting and hateful reputation. Benjamin dedicated his book to the widows and orphans of the murdered black men of the South. Writing in the early 1900s, Mary Church Terrell, an Afro-American woman who worked unceasingly throughout her long life to end racial injustices, agreed with Benjamin that rape was not the real cause for lynchings in the South. Race hatred, she forcefully argued, the hatred of a stronger people toward a weaker who were once held as slaves, led to lynchings, as did a spirit of lawlessness that prevailed throughout the South. Terrell concluded that rape was simply the pretext for lynchings, but ultimately not the cause of mob violence against Afro-Americans. The reason whites and blacks debated lynchings is obvious. Throughout the nation, more than 3,000 people were executed by Judge Lynch in the last quarter of the 19th century. As stated before, it is important to remember that while many lynchings were held in public and carried out in a dramatic fashion, some might have been conducted in secret. This was probably more true during the 1930s and the 1940s, but no one can say for certain when this furtiveness actually started. Because of this possibility, and often the absence of newspaper accounts and investigations by coroners, the exact number of lynchings is unknown. Oh, yes, the exact number of lynchings is unknown. For the love of black people. Furthermore, in some of the cases of violent deaths, it is extremely difficult to determine whether the victims had been lynched or killed when attempting to defend themselves. The NAACP's study of lynchings between 1889 and 1918 lists the death of Robert Shaw, S-H-A-W, a black sharecropper in Hancock County, as a lynching. By my definition, this tragic death was not a lynching. After spending more than an hour in prayer on Sunday, May the 21st, 1905, Marshall threatened to kill several fellow sharecroppers. Convinced that her husband was insane, Shaw's wife notified the sheriff, who came to arrest him. By that time, Shaw, armed with a double-barrel shotgun and a huge amount of ammunition, had barricaded himself in a cabin. He fired upon the sheriff and his deputies. Over the next 2 days, Shaw kept at bay some 300 men who had surrounded his cabin. Described as an expert marksman, he killed the deputy sheriff and wounded 7 other men. Eventually, someone crawled close enough to set the cabin on fire, and Shaw, unable to stop the spreading flames, emerged from the burning building with a gun in his hand. He was immediately cut down by a hail of gunfire. As he lay dying, a group of men attempted to hang him anyway, but were prevented from doing so by the sheriff. In September 1910, John O'Brien, Bryan, a black man, allegedly assaulted John Ashby, Ashby, a deputy sheriff. A white newspaper reported that when O'Brien was eventually cornered by a posse, he pointed a gun at Ashby, who shot first, killing the black man instantly. Ashby was exonerated by reason of self-defense. It is possible that O'Brien surrendered, but that Ashby shot and killed him anyway. In other words, though Ashby's death is not listed as a lynching, it could very well have been one. In both the Shaw and the Ashby cases, much doubt existed about what really happened because the only source of information is white newspapers, which were often very biased against Afro-Americans. Because Afro-Americans were frequently lynched in a dramatic fashion to warn others, it is possible that much more is known about their deaths than about those of the whites who died at the hands of lynch mobs. Unquestionably, the number of whites lynched in the remote mountain regions of the state, where the people had long believed in taking justice into their own hands, is unknown. Don't nobody know. The New York Times contained several articles in 1877 on outlaw gangs operating at will in Wayne County and Carter County in eastern Kentucky. Conditions were such that the governor sent the state militia to end the violence. In Breathitt County, Breathitt, several white gangs vied for supremacy. Among the many men hanged was a black man who had been recruited by the Strong family to take part in the mountain warfare. Arrested for harboring a fugitive, the black man was lynched along with a member of the Strong gang. Much of the white-on-white violence that resulted in lynchings started during Reconstruction and continued for decades. For years, the Simmons gang had operated in Owen and Henry counties, and its members were the prime suspects in many robberies, horse and cattle thefts, and cold-blooded murders too. John Simmons and 4 members of his band were arrested at last in September 1877. Several nights later, a mob seized the Simmons gang from the Henry County Jail and lynched them. When investigating the many murders that had occurred in Henry and Owen counties, Judge John McManana, McManama, proclaimed, "The blood of the slain cries for justice. Human life in Kentucky is not worth the snappings of a man's finger. Acres of grass grow on graves of murdered men in my district." 2 years later, the Times did a story entitled "Life Held Cheap in Kentucky: The Record of Murders, and murderous assaults in 5 years. Based on a report of homicide within 20 counties in Kentucky, the report listed 717 homicides, an average of 36 for each county. These statistics do not by any means cover all crimes of murder and malicious shooting and stabbing in the 20 counties, as they are confined to our court records. And very many criminals have never been brought before courts. On several occasions in the 1880s, the Times ran stories about people forming vigilante committees to rid their communities of thieves and murderers. In 1883, for example, the paper noted a graphic picture of life in the remote neighborhoods of Kentucky have been unveiled recently in the accounts of the execution, without the formality of jury trial, of the leaders of a band of outlaws who have kept Caldwell, Hopkins, and Webster counties in a state of excitement for years. Is that what they call it? Excitement? Clearly, Kentucky's reputation as a violent place was well deserved. Despite the impossibility of knowing the exact number of whites and blacks who died at the hands of mobs, much can still be learned about lynching from the figures gathered at the NAACP, the Tuskegee Institute, and the Chicago Tribune, and from stories in state and local newspapers. According to these and other sources, Kentucky had at least 353 people. 258 was blacks and 89 was white, and 6 was unknown, who was summarily executed. The figures revealed that Afro-Americans accounted for 73% of the people lynched in Kentucky. At first glance, the figures seem to show that Ayers, Williamson, and others are correct, that the greatest number of lynchings occurred during the second period, which includes the late 1880s through the early 1890s. Let's see. I know y'all can't see it, but you can see what I'm looking at. But when looking closer at the figures, and especially when viewing them in Appendix A, which lists each lynching individually, clearly the greatest number of lynchings occurred during the period immediately after the Civil War, from 1865 to 1874, when 117 people were the victims of lynch mobs. Without question, this 10-year period, along with the remainder of the 1870s, was the heyday of lynching in Kentucky. In 1870, an extremely violent year, 36 people died at the hands of lynching mobs. Furthermore, there is clearly an undercount of the number of lynchings for the 1870s, since none were found for 1875. Considering that there were 5 lynchings in 1874 and in 1876, in all likelihood, there were several in 1875 as well. Although lynchings occurred throughout the state, blacks were far more likely to be lynched in western and central Kentucky, the areas of the greatest concentration of blacks. That the number of blacks lynched in eastern Kentucky was small is not surprising, since only a handful of blacks lived in that area at the turn of the century. But 1900, what was that? In 1900, some of the mountain counties had fewer than 20 black residents each. The vast majority of Kentucky's black population lived in Louisville and in Jefferson County. In the central, The vast majority of Kentucky's black population lived in Louisville and in Jefferson County, in the central Kentucky area around Lexington, and in an area in southwest Kentucky. Louisville had the largest number of blacks, about 44,000. An even greater concentration of Afro Americans, however, lived in the 20 counties around Lexington and Fayette County. In 1900, Fayette County had 15,409 blacks. Boyle, Boyle, Clark, and Franklin counties each had about 5,000, and Madison County had 6,690. In several of these counties, blacks made up as much as a third of the population. Region 2, especially Christian, Henderson, Davies, and Hopkins County, had a large concentration of blacks. In Christian County, for example, blacks composed 43.7% of the population. That was almost half. Regions 1, 2, and 4 accounted for 255 of the state's lynchings. Jackson Purchase, comprising only 7 counties, had 49 lynchings, most of which occurred in Fulton County, which was 20 lynchings, and Graves County, which had 13. And they were 2 of the counties with the most lynchings in the entire state. Yep. That Western and Central Kentucky had the most lynchings was consistent with the trend throughout the South, where the areas of the greatest concentration of blacks usually witnessed the most lynchings. That the Louisville metropolitan region had the fewest lynchings also follows the general pattern in the South, for lynchings were not common in the largest urban areas. Why do so many of the state's lynchings occur in Fulton and Graves County of Region 1, and in several counties of Region 2? Although many outsiders refer to Kentucky as a border state, the state's white citizens have always taken pride in their Southern culture. Even more specifically, the white residents of Regions 1 and 2 have long prided themselves as Southerners, pointing to their Confederate ties, though, of course, no area in Kentucky officially withdrew from the Union. Scholars have speculated that the people who settled in Region 1 came from North Carolina and Tennessee, bringing with them Southern attitudes and culture. During the antebellum period, Kentucky, for the most part, was not a place of large plantations, though a few did and still do exist in the southwestern part of the state. That region was also the only section where cotton, itself a major symbol of plantation life in the Old South, was grown. Indeed, in Region 1, which borders the Mississippi River, many of the plantations are very much like those found along the Mississippi Delta. While other parts of the state, especially the region around Louisville and the suburbs of Cincinnati, found markets in the north, the southwestern part looked south to Nashville to sell its goods. This encouraged all the more the Southern attitude on race of Regions 1 and 2. A final factor has to be the violent legacy of both regions, making them rivals with the eastern Kentucky mountain area for the claim as the most violent part of the Bluegrass State. An examination of when and where lynchings took place within Kentucky reveals that mob violence often occurred in cycles. Dang. Logan County experienced its first lynching in October 1883. And from that point through 1895, 13 lynchings took place in the small Logan County community of Auburn. 5 blacks were lynched in 1886 alone. The first one on March 10th for attempted rape. Exactly 2 weeks later, 3 blacks for attempted rape. 5 weeks later, yet another person for attempted rape. 4 lynchings occurred in or near Cadiz, Cadiz, Trigg County, Trigg, in the early 1900s. In January 1906, a black man was lynched for attempted rape. 2 years later, another black man, Tom Weaver, was killed by night riders. The next year, in April 1901, Benny Brown, Brame, a young black, was lynched in Hopkinsville in nearby Christian County for attempted rape. Several months later, Wallace Miller, also black, was lynched in Cadiz for attempting to rape a white woman. 3 lynchings occurred in Shelby County in 3 decades. In July 1891, a black man, Sam Pulliam, Pulliam, was killed for rape. On the night of October the 2nd, 1901, Jimbo Fields and Clarence Garnett, both young blacks who had been accused of murder, were lynched. Then in 1911, 2 more black men, Wade Patterson and Eugene Marshall, died at the hands of lynchers. In Western Kentucky, 7 men died at the hands of mobs from December the 18th to December the 26th, 1896. The first lynching occurred in Logan County when 3 whites, Arch, Dink, and Bill Proctor, were killed. On November the 24th, 1895, Arch had killed 2 men in the small community of Adairville, Adirville. His father, Dink, and brother Bill were charged with being accessories to the crime. The Proctors had 3 separate trials. No verdict was reached in any one of them. On the night of December 18th, about 100 men came and took Dink and Arch from the jail and hanged them from a cedar tree. Who is it? I'm busy. I'm live. Come back. Sorry about that. On the night of December 18th, about 100 men took Dink and Arch from the jail and hanged them from a cedar tree. Bill, described by the New York Times as powerful and courageous, had sworn that no mob would ever take him out of a jail cell alive. He was shot an estimated 30 times. As the Times stated, though numbering over 100, the mob were afraid to risk their skin and shot him in a cowardly fashion through the door of his cell. The lynching of Bill Proctor was probably viewed as justice by the citizens of Logan County. He was one of 4 men who had been charged with the July 19, 1894 hanging of Edwin Trauber, Traughber, a white bad man from Adairville. Reputedly, Bill had killed several other men and had been tried on 4 different occasions for his life, but had always escaped. And this fact caused the mob to take the law into its own hands in this present case. In Owensboro on Christmas Day, a mob spirited Alfred Hope, a black man, from jail and hanged him from a tree in the courthouse yard. Holt had been charged with the murder of a police officer and was to go on trial the next day. The county judge and prosecuting attorney, both confident that the law would have punished Holt, harshly condemned the actions of the mob. Several days after the incident, the Owensboro Ministerial Association, a white organization, met and unanimously adopted a resolution calling Holt's lynching a flagrant violation of decency and order, a clearly defined murder, and a most unprovoked interference with the civil court. Then the same week that the Proctors and Hope were lynched, 3 blacks died at the hands of a mob in Mayfield, leading to the threat of a race war in the city. Will Haley, white, and Henry Finley, black, sustained minor injuries during an argument. Late that evening, a white mob shot Finley to death. Commenting on the murder, the local newspaper explained, the citizens in the section in which the Negro lived, while deploring the necessity of violence, are glad to be rid of him, as he appears to have been a bad man and one whom the community can well afford to spare. The very next day, Jim Stone, in jail on a charge of rape, was carried to the courthouse yard and hanged. The mob pinned a note to his body, listing the names of several blacks who were to leave town or suffer the same fate. Tom Chambers, Chambers, a black alleged to be involved in shady activities, armed himself in anticipation of the mob. Chambers opened fire on his attackers when they came to destroy his establishment, repulsing them. In response to Chambers' act of meeting violence with violence, practically every white man and boy in Mayfield and the surrounding countryside armed himself. By daylight, several hundred white people had assembled at the courthouse, poised for an attack from blacks. Every road in town was watched. That afternoon, a local black, Will Suett, Suett, arrived by train from St. Louis, unaware of the recent lynchings, but afraid of the armed men. Suett started running away as soon as the mob approached him. Refusing to halt on command, he was killed in a hail of gunfire. The death of this innocent man seemed to take much of the fight from the angry whites. They now realized that no group of blacks was making plans to attack the town. City officials ordered everyone, white as well as blacks, off the streets by 10 p.m. and declared that Suett's death was unprovoked. Some white citizens immediately announced their intention to raise funds to help support his aged mother. The Courier Journal reprinted comments from 14 newspapers about the lynching wave in the state during the last week of December 1896. In general, white editors in areas removed from the lynchings called upon state officials to end the violence. A number of harsh, sarcastic comments were made by out-of-state journals. It was a Merry Christmas last week in Kentucky. 6 lynchings within 6 days. But while this may be a joyous way of celebrating in Kentucky, we cannot regard it with unmixed feelings of satisfaction from the standpoint of the country at large. If these things continue, there may be a joint Turkish and Spanish intervention in our domestic affairs in behalf of humanity. Although 3 of the people lynched were not black, another paper added. In Kentucky, this Christmas, the favorite decorations of trees is strangled Negroes. Although 3 of the people lynched were not black, another paper added. In Kentucky this Christmas, the favorite decoration of trees is strangled Negroes. The causes for most of Kentucky's lynchings can be determined. To be sure, one must use caution when accepting the word of lynchers on why they took the law into their own hands and on whether the person who and on whether the person was actually guilty of any offense. As Frederick Douglass noted, when the will of the mob is accomplished, when its thirst for blood has been quenched, when its victim is speechless, silent, and dead, his mobocratic accusers and murderers, of course, have the ear of the world all to themselves, and the world, hearing only the testimony of the mob, generally approves its verdict. That's how society just let it happen. Yeah, just let slavery happen to us, even when they saw us trying to fight back. And all of society. Given that no trial was held and few, if any, records exist, it is virtually impossible to determine guilt or innocence. Throughout this study, in the cases where a man was lynched for the alleged rape and murder of a woman, his lynching has been listed under rape, since that is the category that whites most often proclaimed as the cause of lynchings. Undoubtedly, there were instances where rape was alleged as a way of securing tacit approval for the lynching. Therefore, we can assume that the figures for rape as a cause for lynching are inflated, and that more people were actually lynched for murder and other reasons. Indeed, murder and attempted murder constitute the largest cause for lynchings, followed by rape and attempted rape, and a wide variety of causes, including theft, arson, known criminal status, robbery, and horse stealing. 28% of the people, white and black, lynched in Kentucky were killed for charges of rape or attempted rape. This figure is slightly higher than the percentage cited for the South and for the nation overall. Significantly, however, when considering blacks only, the figures show that rape was the number one cause for lynchings. 85 were lynched for rape or attempted rape, 62 for murder or attempted murder. That more blacks were lynched for rape than for murder reinforced what the majority of whites believed about lynching. Actually, those 85 lynchings for rape or attempted rape accounted for only 33% of all lynchings of blacks, which was 258. In no state in the South did rape as a cause for lynching approach 50%, even though the rape of white women was cited so often as the cause for lynching that it became the gospel among practically all the white Americans. President Theodore Roosevelt, who had a blind spot when it came to racial matters, said that the greatest existing cause of lynching is the perpetration, especially by black men, of the heinous crime of rape, the most abominable in all the categories of crimes, even worse than murder. The biggest rapist in the world. Projected all of that evilness right there on the black folk. Black man, you better wake up. Honey, you ain't you no more. Although denouncing lynchings as acts of lawlessness, the president clearly believed that rapists should be dealt with quickly and firmly. Moreover, in my judgment, the crime of rape should always be punished with death, as is the case with murder. Assault with intent to commit rape should be made a capital crime, at least in the discretion of the court, and provisions should be made by which the punishment may follow immediately upon the heels of the offense, while the trial should be so conducted that the victim need not be wantonly shamed while giving testimony, and that the least possible publicity shall be given to the details. When investigating lynchings in the early 1900s, Ray Stannard Baker, an enlightened progressive, clearly blamed Afro-Americans for the lynchings resorted to by whites. In both the North and the South, he said, I found that this floating, worthless Negro caused most of the trouble. Their crimes were marked by an almost animal-like ferocity. What? Woo! They said the blacks' crimes was marked by an animal-like ferocity. But meanwhile, they who call themselves the Ku Klux Klan, the Clanimals, how dare you? You and your family, your ancestors, and nobody want to speak about it. Now all of a sudden everybody's so docile and peaceful and loving and generous and trustworthy. Everybody but the black man. When we have it right here, documented in black and white, on paper, videos after videos. Black America, wake the fuck up. Them motherfuckers said y'all crimes was marked by an almost animal-like ferocity. To be just like they ass. After thoroughly evaluating Baker's comments, one of his biographers has concluded, given the enormity of the crime of lynching, Baker's objectivity and his clear sympathy for lynchers, as well as lynch, seem now accrue a distortion. By contrast, another white writing in the early 1900s, W.D. Sheldon, Sheldon, strongly denounced lynching under any circumstances and refused to accept the contention that the brutal criminal acts committed by Afro-Americans justified whites violating their own laws. Willis D. Weatherford, a Southerner who considered himself to be working to end lynchings, explained in an address before the Southern Sociological Congress that the main cause of lynchings was the assaults on white women, committed primarily by black men. I think there can be no doubt that a considerable amount of crime on the part of colored men against white men and women is due to a spirit of getting even. Not getting even with any particular individual, but just an indefinite getting even with the white race. Wow. Half of them motherfucking racist rates probably didn't even happen. I would bet my last $2 they didn't happen. And then considering the hell, all y'all asses come back and repent, need to get it off your chest that you lied. Getting even with the white race. Ooh-wee. Weatherford told his large white audience that the argument being advanced by Southerners that lynchings would prevent other rape from occurring was erroneous. Negroes have been known to assault white women on the way home from a most horrible and revolting lynching scene. That's what the Negroes have been known to assault white women on the way home from a most horrible and revolting lynching scene. So Negroes just out waiting while white women is leaving the lynching. And on her way home, Negroes is just out waiting to rape. education, respect for the legal system, and for the virtue of all women, black as well as white, he concluded, was the only ways to end lynchings. Weathersford's comments are remarkable, but they may be representative of a person who was considered an enlightened white in the early 20th century. His strong assertions that Afro-Americans were less advanced intellectually than whites, and that blacks did in fact rape white women, helped to justify lynchings. If Weatherford is at all typical of the Southern whites who denounced lynchings, it is certainly debatable what impact they had on the practice coming to an end. Not surprisingly, a number of Afro-American leaders sharply disputed this claim that the rape of white women was the actual reason for many lynchings. Francis J. Grimke, a prominent minister in Washington, D.C., explained that so often when the charge of rape was made, the black man and white woman obviously had a romantic relationship. Because the affair had become public or because the woman felt spurned, the claim of rape was convenient to end the matter and save the purity of the woman. Grimke discounted the claims of white lynchers that black men usually confess their crimes of rape before being put to death. There's no reason for the Negro to confess, he reasoned, for to be guilty of such an offense meant certain death anyway. The purpose of these alleged confessions, just like the purpose of charging rape in the first place, was to provide an excuse for the lynching. And so the temptation always is to say he confessed. Of course, if he confessed, that puts his guilt beyond all doubt, and his execution, though in an unlawful way, doesn't seem quite so bad as lynching an innocent man or one about whose guilt there is some doubt. Newspaper editors Ida Wells Barnett and Robert C.O. Benjamin published statistics showing that in no more than a third of the cases of lynchings was rape or attempted rape cited as the cause. In partial court trials, both forcefully argued, would have reduced the number even further. Although one may argue with Grimke about romantic relationships between black men and white women, he was correct in saying that the cry of rape helped justify the practice of lynching. As Joel Williamson explained, to say that blacks were lynching for attacking white women as a way for whites to gain widespread was a way for whites to gain widespread acceptance for their lawless acts. And they knew it. From pillar to post, from coast to coast, they knew if they just said, we protecting the white woman, a white woman was raped, a white woman was beat, they knew. And that's why white women right today, that's why they call and cry and complain and beg and yep. But want to act like with us and stuff. Oh, we love y'all. We just love y'all. Y'all ass ain't made a goddamn thing right. You ain't made a damn thing right. Now they asses want to wear this blue bracelet. Want us to wear a blue bracelet. I forgot what it's called and stuff. It's supposed to be a movement. Oh, we together as one. You a damn lie. We ain't never been together as one. Because y'all ass ain't never been sincere with us. Ain't none of y'all ever been sincere with black people. He argues that the real reason for lynchings was to keep blacks in their place. The generations of Afro-Americans reaching maturity in the decades after the Civil War were viewed as aggressive and lacking in the qualities their parents and grandparents had acquired while under the control of slave owners. A lynching was a just punishment for a black deemed guilty of some transgression. But just as important, it was a warning to others as well. Agreeing with Williamson, Suzanne Lebsock, Lebsock, explains, it was after the war that the mythology of rape became a prominent feature of white Southern thinking. What more efficient way to reestablish the dominance of white men? The belief that black men were bent on raping white women justified the suppression of any form of black male assertiveness. White newspapers in Kentucky described the Afro-Americans accused of rape in derogatory terms. Such labels as black fiend, ape-like, Darwin's missing link, and beast were used repeatedly. The expression Negro brute seems to have been especially popular. The Courier Journal, perhaps the state's most enlightened white newspaper, ran some headlines in bold letters announcing, a black ravisher receives proper attention at the hands of Judge Lynch, and a black devil hanged to a tree near Campbellsville. His crime, the attempted outrage of a helpless young woman. On one occasion, an editor for the paper attempted to resort to wit when describing the lynch victim. Blackbird on the cherry tree. White newspapers gave details on the method used to kill the victim and the manner in which he faced death. And because they viewed the black as deserving the punishment, the reporters often wrote about the lynching in what they thought to be a humorous manner. Regarding the lynching of Jim Mitchell at Mount Sterling for rape, the Courier Journal correspondent said his captors took him to a railroad trestle about half a mile from town, strung him up for safekeeping, and left him. The lifeless body was cut down by a coroner this morning and planted. The general impression is that Judge Lynch did a very good job considering the brief time the court had in which to make up its mind. Several years later, when discussing the lynching of Sam Scales in northern Kentucky, Scales, the same newspaper found humor in the fact that the black man acted cowardly when taken by the mob. The paper quoted at length an anonymous member of the mob who talked about the fun they had at Scales' expense. Oh, but that nigger did plead for mercy and go on like a baby. He didn't have no nerve at all. They pulled him out, though, threw him into a wagon and started down the pike with him to the woods. He a hollering, and all the gang are yelling and firing their guns. Scales begged awful hard to get off and said he wasn't guilty, but it was a no-go. Sympathy was always reserved for the woman who had been the victim of the black rapist. These women were described as being frail, yet brave. They had done everything possible to prevent the attack. That the woman was beautiful, the flower of the community, was always cited. One could logically assume from the newspaper accounts that every woman attacked was a member of one of the very best females. That every woman attacked was a member of one of the very best females in the community. Miss Ella Dice belongs to one of the best families in Adair County. Mrs. Glenn belongs to one of the best families in the county. She was a Miss Hetty Ballow, and about 2 years ago was married to Thomas J. Glenn, a prosperous and highly respected young farmer. It is ironic that one of the main justifications for lynchings, sparing white women the humiliation of court trials, where all the facts would be aired, was consistently ignored by the press. in account after account of lynchings. The white newspapers gave the woman's name, specific information about the attack, and how she somehow escaped to safety. In speeches and articles during the 1890s, Frederick Douglass challenged white people about the necessity of resorting to lynchings to protect the modesty of white women, pointedly noting that their justifications were contemptible and hypocritical. He wrote, it is not only mock modesty, but mob modesty. Men who can collect hundreds and thousands of their kind, thirsting for vengeance, and can spread before them in the tempest and whirlwind of vulgar passion the most disgusting details of crime, connecting the names of women with the same, should not be allowed to shelter themselves under any pretense of modesty. Such a pretense is absurd and shameless upon the face of it. Who does not know that the modesty of womanhood is always, and in every such case, an object for special protection in a court of law? On the other hand, who does not know that a lawless mob, composed in part of the basest men, can have no such respect for the modesty of women as has a court of law? No woman need be ashamed to confront one who has insulted or assaulted her in any court of law. Besides, innocence does not hesitate to come to the rescue of justice, and need not even in this case. An important part of the entire rape ritual was for the white woman to identify the rapist. This too was iconic, since lynchers claimed that their actions were calculated to avoid the possibility of the woman ever again coming face to face with her attacker. Nanny Berry of Nicholas County was dragged into the woods and raped in July 1879. After the man left, Berry proceeded to town and informed officials. A light-skinned Afro-American, John Breckinridge, Breckinridge, was caught and taken before Berry, even though she was at home confined to a bed. She quickly identified him as the mulatto who attacked her. At first, the mob turned Breckinridge over to the authorities, but then quickly returned to the jail and lynched him. On another occasion in the same county, William Tyler was accused of the rape of Anna Campbell. The girl's father led a mob in breaking down the jail door with sledgehammers and seizing Tyler. Words were exchanged between the alleged rapist and the father of the victim. Tyler said, "Gentlemen, I am innocent of this. I did not do it. I am not guilty." Campbell responded, "Yes, you are. My little girl said you did." That, of course, was enough. As the paper reported to its usual way of justifying the hanging, that, of course, was enough. As the paper reported in its usual way of justifying the hanging, the mob, which throughout the entire proceeding had conducted itself in a most orderly manner, consistent with its never lost sight of object, formed a perfect cordon around the prisoner and took its stand upon the bridge. Miss Peter Crow was raped in July 1889. After the attack, Mrs. Crow, who was described as a small, delicate lady compared with the heavy-set rapist, who weighed more than 200 pounds, was confined to bed. Suspicion centered on Jim Kelly, who had been seen in the vicinity of where the rape was supposedly taking place. The mob spirited Kelly out of the parish jail, intent on taking him to the home of Mrs. Crow to go over the details of the rape one last time. Her rapist, she had already told the leader of the mob, would be known by the scratch marks she had made on his face. Kelly did, in fact, have several scratch marks. though he said he had been in a fight with a tramp. After Mrs. Crow made a positive identification of Kelly, the mob carried out the lynching. In the majority of cases, no one challenged the word of a white woman when she identified her attacker. But assuming that a rape or even an attempted rape had occurred, it would have been understandable for the woman to be so upset that she might have been unable to identify the rapist. Even worse, she might have identified the wrong person as the attacker. A few newspaper accounts, which were overwhelmingly unsympathetic towards blacks accused of crimes, suggest that the women's memory of the attack left something to be desired. On December 14, 1892, Katie Anderson of Bowling Green claimed that she had been raped by an unidentified black man. After an investigation lasting several days, the police arrested Bob Harper. Because of the efforts of police, Harper was protected from the mob and came to trial 2 weeks after the alleged rape had taken place. The newspaper reported that Anderson was very slow to make a statement implicating the Negro, and it was only by dint of the most persistent questioning that she finally said that according to her best knowledge and belief, Harper was the man who assaulted her. When summarizing the events of the first day of the examining trial, that this phase of the trial for a black man accused of rape lasted more than 1 day was remarkable. The reporter concluded, Miss Anderson's identification is not positive enough to warrant the more conservative thinking. Miss Anderson's identification is not positive enough to warrant the more conservative thinking people in taking the law into their own hands. And this is all that saved Harper's life. It is now thought the trial would be permitted to come to a close. Public opinion is still divided as to the Negro's guilt, and only a thorough investigation will determine it one way or the other. The newspaper statement that Anderson identified Harper under persistent questioning is totally misleading in light of the exact words that were said at the examining trial. The official stenographer of Warren County Circuit Court, R.J. Jarboe, J-A-R-B-O-E, wrote down the young woman's testimony. Anderson was interviewed at great length by the prosecuting attorney, James C. Sims, and by William L. Delaney, a prominent judge serving one of Harper's attorneys. It was clearly established that the man had worn a mask and a bonnet when he first attacked Anderson, but he had willingly removed those items during the assault. This is important because Anderson had known Harper for years and had seen him recently. Some of the testimony follows. Have you ever seen the man who committed that assault upon you since he did commit it? I don't know. Please tell the court whether either of the prisoners you have examined this evening and sitting in this room, whether either one of them is the man that assaulted you and inflicted those wounds upon your person. The witness looks at her fathers and says, Papa, I don't know what to say. Question by Judge H.B. Hines. It is necessary in order that I can try the case that you make some answer. The witness does not answer. Miss Cora Anderson, Katie Anderson's sister, you have thought now enough to answer it. Judge H.B. Hines, Miss Katie, can't you answer that question for us? If you can't answer, say so. And if you can answer, tell us. That is all we want to know. If you don't know, say so. And if you do, tell it. Witness does not answer. Miss Katie, can you answer it? I don't know. To the best of my knowledge, the last one that stood up, Harper, looks more like him than anyone I have seen yet. Do you know Bob Harper? Yes, sir. Judge W.L. Delaney on cross-examination. Bob Harper was brought up to your house several times, was he not? Yes, sir. On that occasion, didn't you look at Bob Harper and say he was not the man? Yes, sir. And didn't you ask why they brought that man Harper there and said there was no use in bringing him? Yes, sir. The next morning, as the examining trial continued, a mob of 1,000 motherfuckers surrounded the courthouse while 50 armed men marched into the courtroom and took Harper. Although it was broad daylight, no one concealed his identity. In fact, the paper reported that the leaders were all well-known citizens. In his own defense, Harper made a statement as he was being carried away. I have tried to do everything in the world to prove my innocence. I am not guilty and die with this on my lips. I have never done anybody any harm. I am innocent. When informed of Harper's death, Anderson said quietly that it was a comfort to her to know that he was beyond any question the guilty man. A few days later, however, Anderson stated emphatically to the public that Harper had been the rapist. Only the fear that he would be instantly hanged before my eyes kept me from saying so positively at the time. And I could not rid myself of this fear. And I was so nervous and frightened when I was before the court that at times I could not command my voice to talk. She had no sympathy for the murdered black man. It was a horrible death for any human being, but I would never have been without fear as long as he was alive. The local correspondent of the Courier Journal applauded the manner in which the good citizens of Bowling Green had done an unpleasant but necessary chore. No such work was ever done before in so orderly and quiet a manner. There was no loud talking, not a shot fired, and no unusual demonstration. The men who composed the crowd were a resolute and determined set, and showed that they merely meant to protect the virtue of their homes and their families, and they proceeded about the work in a businesslike way. Yeah, lynching a whole man. There can be no question as to Harper's guilt, and though his punishment was not brought about according to the laws of law, to the forms of law, I will admit that it was a righteous one. Several days after the lynching, ooh, mm. Several days after the lynching, Harper's other attorney, Judge Will Hobson, began interviewing a wide range of people about whether or not his client had actually raped Katie Anderson. The testimony of many different whites, including law officers and blacks, placed Harper elsewhere in town when the alleged incident occurred. In contrast with the usual statements by white folks that the lynched black person was a bad Negro and a menace to the community, all the people interviewed said that Harper was the ideal citizen. Several former employees remember the black youth as honest and considerate. One woman said he always returned the correct change after purchasing her groceries. And if anything, extremely shy, especially around white people. More than 50 years after the lynching, attorney John B. Rogers, who had attended the examining trial, wrote that Harper was innocent of the rape of Katie Anderson. He accurately recalled the name of the man who led the mob and the details of the lynching. The mob is a beast and should always be so described. I have seen instances of it in my lifetime. When I was studying law in Bowling Green over half a century ago, an unforgivable crime was committed against a Miss Anderson, who lived at the outskirts of Bowling Green, at the foot of the Cedar now on the Nashville Road. Great excitement prevailed. That's what they call lynching, great excitement. A Negro, Bob Harper, was arrested. An examining trial was begun at the courthouse, and Mr. James C. Sims, who subsequently became my law partner, was prosecuting, representing the Commonwealth. A mob marched in with guns and took the prisoner from the judge and carried him to the old fairgrounds, where Laurel Avenue now is, and there hung him. I saw it all. It made me sick. There were many members of the local militia company in the group, with guns taken from the armory. It was led by a prominent man, Crit Alexander, C-R-I-T, who was a leader in the Christian church in Bowling Green. I saw them drag the poor fellow along, and at the fairgrounds he was placed in a wagon and a noose put around his neck. I saw the man who tied the noose. The wagon was driven from beneath Harper, who I saw dangling and kicking. Then I turned away with loathing. Nothing was ever done about it. No indictment was ever returned. Although the mob was unmasked, Mr. Sims was outspoken in his criticism, although he was the prosecuting attorney. He laid some blame on Mr. McCormick, on Dr. McCormick, as encouraging the mob. Your cousin, Colonel Will Hobson, published a pamphlet to show that Harper was innocent, but Harper was underground, and the people had lost interest.